Thanks, Jim. Hi, everyone. What we're going to cover today is why podcasts should be part of your marketing plan. We're going to look at podcasts and podcast interviews, how to decide on the right objective for your interview, how to plan your content, how to select the right podcast, approaching a host, the do's and don'ts during an interview, how to repurpose your interviews, and interviews outside Stitcher. And I have a special offer for you. My name is Vivo Yolu. I'm a radio presenter, audio marketing expert, and the author of How to Use Podcasts to Promote Your Book. I have over 20 years marketing experience and I've worked for companies such as BMW, Walt Disney, Barclaycard, and Royal Bank of Scotland. Royal Bank of Scotland is a big bank here in the UK. I always like to start off with a definition of what a podcast is because there's some misconception about what it is, and till this day I still get asked what a podcast is. And a podcast, according to Wikipedia, is an audio or video digital file which can be consumed or downloaded either through a computer, smartphone, or tablet. And a lot of people think that a podcast is only on iTunes, and that is not the case. It's just as if you would say a video that's on that is only can only be on YouTube. So that is not the case. A podcast is a file you can have on your website, or it can be on iTunes or any of the podcasting platforms. Why do I say that a podcast is important? You can easily build rapport and establish connection with people. Just as you listen to lots of your favorite author podcasts, you go to an event and you see the person, you feel as if you know them. You can walk up to them and have a conversation with them. You've already established that rapport on your side, and the host meets you and can start talking to you instantly. The other thing that has happened is a change in lifestyles, and technology has been driving this. I mean, we have smartphones and tablets now, but what this means is we have information at our fingertips, and your smartphone or your tablet is a powerful device for you to decide how, where, and when you want to consume content. A lot more people are using their smartphones and tablets, and people want to consume different types of content. So it's not only reading the written word, but it's also listening to audio or watching videos. People can choose now what works best for them because there's such variety available to lots of people. The other reason why podcasts are important is because you can repurpose it into different formats. So you can transcribe it into Word, or you can upload it onto a video. You can create a video out of it and upload onto YouTube or any of the other video platforms. And then Carplay integration, which is something I'd like to talk a bit more about, and why it has now become significant. So Apple's Carplay is a software technology that integrates with car's auto system. And when it's connected to your iPhone or to the iPhone, it becomes the dashboard display, as you can see with the photograph. And Apple developed this over 12 months ago, but it's now become significant because about 40 car manufacturers have signed up to integrate this technology into their cars. What this means is that there are going to be more podcast adopters. And for those of you in the States who drive a lot and use their cars a lot, it means you're going to have one-on-one connection with more people to compare to when it was only people listening through iPhones and tablets. People who commute spend a lot of time commuting. And if you think on the trains or on the buses, average time, at least here in the UK, is 45 minutes on average. Then for you in the States, it's a lot longer. So you have more time, or there's more time for the listener to engage with what it's being said, or what the podcast is talking about. As you can see from the dashboard, it's not only the iPhone app or the podcast app on iTunes that is going to you have access to through this CarPlay. You would have access to other apps such as Stitcher and iHeartRadio. So this is more significant for you because if you think about it, there are going to be more people who are going to start adopting podcasts from the car and then listen on another device. So they'll have their iPhones and they would have their tablets to also further listen to what they want to listen to through their phone. So this is another way to get more podcast adopters. When I think about interviews and when I think about authors using podcast interviews to promote their book, I always say you start off with having an objective of what your interview is going to be about. And I say there are two ways you can define your objective of your interview. It's either to raise awareness of your book or it's to raise awareness of your author brand. And they're two different objectives to have. And my own humble opinion is that you shouldn't try and do both in one interview because you actually dilute the effect or you minimize the impact you can have during that interview. So I would say raise awareness of your book. You're giving more in-depth knowledge or more in-depth understanding of your book. Or you're trying to reach a niche audience or audiences through that objective. And with your author brand, you're really talking about your journey, how you got into writing, why you wrote the book, and who inspired you to do that. When you think about each of these objectives, they offer you different things. If you're going on to talk about a more in-depth knowledge about your book or give more in-depth understanding about your book, there's a reason you are there. There's a reason you're going to solve a problem or you're going to address an issue for that particular group that you're going to talk about, or you're going to talk about the particular issue you're going to raise. And that gives you more depth into the audience and more understanding to another audience about your book. There are three reasons I give for having an objective for your interview. And I think the first one, it helps you plan better. You minimize your time or maximize your time because you are able to you're able to decide who needs to listen to what. When you plan better, you know what your content is. You're able to say, well, I only want to share X with this particular audience, or I want to share Y with this particular audience. And it helps you prepare the stories and examples that you use over the different places that you're going to have these interviews. So if you imagine that you have stories that go with different elements that you're going to talk about your interview, people who follow you on different podcasts will think, oh, she's going to use the same example or she's going to tell the same story over and over again. But having an idea of what your objective is going to be gives you that opportunity to plan accordingly and use different examples on different interviews. So when you think about it, if we're going to look at it in more detail about planning your content, and let's look at it from the nonfiction point of view. Your book is there to solve a problem, provide knowledge, or it's for a particular target group. And for fiction, it's about the character, the location, and the issue. And I always say plan according to what are the compelling aspects of the book or the themes of the book, because that gives you more knowledge and more understanding of who you're going to go to with the content that you want to share. And let's look at it in more detail. And a non-fiction author, you look at the compelling aspects, like I said, and then you look at what value the listeners will get from the individual chapters that you're going to be talking about, or the individual chapters in your book. What else would be you have to think about who else would be interested in your book and what is topical that relates to your book. If you think about me, on my book, podcasts, everybody's talking about podcasts and podcasting now. So it's relevant and topical today about what's going on within the sector. But for somebody else, there are other things that are going on in the media that you possibly relate to your book, or you can look at what's going on in the media and see how it relates to your book, and then approach your host and say, this is what I want to talk about. I've written a book and this is why it is relevant. An example is a book that has been written about improving productivity for leaders and managers. And if you think about it, a legal podcast under normal circumstances wouldn't be interested in a book for leaders and managers. But if the author of this book has tailored a chapter that they know lawyers would be interested in, then he can approach the podcast and say, I would like to talk about improving productivity for lawyers, and here's what I have in mind, and you give them a sketch. So that gives you an idea that he can extend the reach of his book, so he's providing more knowledge and understanding into that sector and for this legal podcast. For fiction, you can look at it, what are the issues with the main characters of your book? What elements does the book address? So, for instance, I've used an example of a military wife, but you can use any other example that your book is on and say, what are the issues within that book that would be relevant to someone else? So say, what elements, where is the book set? And have you used any landmarks in the book? So if you're thinking about landmarks for a book, a travel podcast would be interested in, would be one podcast that you can go on and talk about your book, but within the context of the location you've set the book in and why it is important. Because what you're doing is you're giving that podcast a different view of, different destinations that people can go to and why they should go to those destinations, but you've used your book as a reference point, and the interview would be from a reference point of your book. And then what's topical that relates to your book? In the same way I've talked about it for nonfiction, what are the issues? So maybe an issue with some of the characters, or issues, the elements within your book that are topical, that you can go on that area, that specialist or that niche podcast and talk about your book within that context. So when you're thinking about the right podcast, you've outlined your content, you've planned the right content you want to share. You have to decide on a couple of things. And these things I always say, because my experience as a radio presenter, I've done many, many interviews, over 300 interviews, and I've had lots of authors on my show as well. And you have to look for the right fit for you, your book, and your brand. And it's not that you have to be on every podcast, because not every podcast is suited for you, and you're not suited for every podcast. So think about, is this podcast or being on this show, is it going to help me, my book, and my brand? And you look at it from the position of who the listeners are. Are they the right listeners who would potentially become readers, or are they already readers of your book or within the genre of your book? And what's the tone of voice of the host? I know a lot of people don't consider this, but if you are going to go on a show and you want to listen back to this interview, would you like how the host sounds when people are replaying the interview? It may not bother you when you're doing the interview, but you need to think about it. And the way you can do that is when you go to the host website, you listen to some sample interviews, and do you like how that host sounds when they're interviewing someone else? And if you can imagine yourself being in that author's position or that guest's position, then you're already on to a winner there. Then what of the interview style? Is that interview style suited to you, your book, and your brand? And I think you have to really think about this. If somebody is, maybe too quiet or too laid back or too brash and too straightforward, if that's not the style of who you are, and you're going to be uncomfortable and jumpy, then it doesn't do you and your book any favors. I know you're going on to market your book or to promote your book, but it really doesn't do you any favors, especially if you can't promote it after the interview. And then the show format, and I think about it in this way. If it's a double interview, so they have two hosts on the show, what's the banter between both of them? Are you able to talk about your book in sufficient enough detail for listeners to get a sense of the content you're sharing, or you and your brand? Is it going to work that way? Have you listened to other shows that the authors who've been on, they've been able to actively talk about their book? And if you understand what the show is about and you know what your objective is, if there's a mismatch there, you want to talk about your book, but they want to talk about you as an author, then there's a mismatch. You're going on to really promote your book, but they want to talk about you as an author. And also, if the way the show is laid out, you don't have enough time to really either get into a good length of conversation, then it may not be the right show for you. And I haven't put on this slide, listenership. But listenership shouldn't be what drives you to a podcast. That is great, but if it's the wrong listenership, then it doesn't do you any favors. You might as well just be, you might as well just go and talk and nobody else is listening to you. You want to go on the right show that has the listeners you are trying to attract to become readers of your book. So when it comes to approaching a host, this is something that I experience a lot of the time when I'm not the right platform for people to promote their book on. My show is not really about promoting authors' books. So when people approach me saying they want to promote their books, they obviously haven't listened to what the show is about and they're contacting me. And just recently, about a month ago, a lady got in touch with me saying she wanted me to interview her. And I said, had you looked around the... she didn't even address me by name. She had been on my website. She saw that my name was Viv. She didn't even address me by name. And she just dropped me an email through the contact page and said, I want to be interviewed on your show. I have written 20 books. And there was no context to that. I replied to her and said, oh, have you looked around my website and do you know what type of interview you want to do? Oh, yeah, sorry. Yes, this is the type of interview I want to do. So a lot of the times, people don't know that this is the way you have to approach shows. And it's really for your own benefit. So I say, go on a website. There's always a name of the person who hosts the show or who the two people who host the show. So address when you write the email, address the host by name or the hosts by name. And what you send a bio picture, you send a picture of yourself, a synopsis of your book, what you want to talk about. If you bear in mind that a lot of podcast hosts get written to and asked to feature people on your show, you will stand out if you've taken the time to tell them what you want to talk about. You save them time in making a decision if you should come on the show or not. But you also save them time in preparing to have you on the show. You say you talk about how what you want to talk about relates to the show, how it will complement or even oppose a past interview. So when you're doing your research, you look around the website to see what else the host has covered. What's really of interest to this host? Is there any way you can add value? That's the way you approach it. And a host will love you to come on if you're going to come on there to give value to their listeners. And it's not so much that you want to promote your book, but you want to give value. And if your book is what is going to give them value, then that's the sweet spot for everyone. You see, you explain the benefits, and you also have a link to your website, previous interviews or blogs that you've written that actually gives more credibility to who you are as an author and what exactly you want to talk about during their show. So do's and don'ts in during an interview. This is something that I tell stories of people who've done many good do's and stories of people who've done not so many nice don'ts on the show. If we start off with the do's, I would say be personable. You smile a lot. Your voice, the excitement comes through in your voice, and be personable. You want people to like you. I know it's not there's so much competition out there, but you want people to endear themselves to you. So when you have a plan of what you want to say, you've thought about the stories or the examples, you give examples that would get people to smile or to think back, oh yes, I've been in that situation before. You want people to like you, really. And another thing is staying in the moment. Staying in the moment is something that I see, I've asked a question or the guest is talking and all of a sudden they've drifted off to somewhere, God knows where, and they don't know, they've lost their train of thought and they've lost the thread of what they were saying, and they get themselves all mixed up. What they can say, oh, so what was your question again, or what was I talking about? And if you stay present in the moment, you're focused on what you're saying, and when you've planned, you always know at what point you are during the interview. And then sell yourself. This is when I raise this point, not a lot of people like it when I say sell yourself, and And sell yourself is not a bad thing because you are there to talk about your book. But you're not there to talk about your book in every other second. And that's one of the don'ts I'm going to talk about. But you're there to get people to know more about you. Know if you're a nonfiction author, you know about your expertise and why you should be taken seriously and why you are a credible source for this information or the content that you're sharing. So, in a way, you're selling yourself. And if you think about actors and actresses when they have a new movie coming out, they're going on to different talk shows to talk about their new movie. There's always a personal element in what they talk about, stories that they can share that would get people to laugh and identify with them. And that's what I mean by selling yourself. It's really giving people reference points that they can identify with you and connect with you in a different way. And I always say that you should have takeaway points. So if you imagine that at the end of every interview, you want people to go away, and if it's either a question you pose a question that they would go and mull over, or you've given them some happy thoughts, but more importantly, you've put across all the points that you wanted to share when you planned the content for that interview. You can write them down. I mean, most of the interviews are not live anymore, but you can write them down. And the beauty is you can be looking at it and make sure that at every point you're talking about something, there's a way to bring in those takeaway points that the listeners would have something to go away and remember you by. When it comes to don'ts, not planning, and this is sort of the opposite of all we've been talking about: planning, make sure you have the right content. But some people just want to go on a podcast and wing it. Well, I know my content, then yeah, it doesn't matter, I would know what to say. Well, that might work in some instances, but in many cases it doesn't work. I've done many interviews and people who've come on that haven't planned don't do as well as people who've planned. They know what they want to get across and they haven't taken the opportunity and the experience lightly. And those people get so much value and so much benefit out of the interviews they've planned about. And when you can't talk in depth, you don't have enough confidence and you can't really shine. That's really the bottom line with that. I have many stories of people who've come on that has happened to them. Another don't is referring to your book all the time. So you make a statement, oh yes, in chapter 5 of my book, yes. And in chapter 1, page 20, I refer to XYZ. That's a no-no. People turn off because people understand you've written a book and you want to sell the book. And we were all aware that is a fact, that's a given. But making reference to it all the time is a put-off. You're trying to say that the person who's listening doesn't remember that you're on there to promote your book. That's a no-no. Apart from that, as a host, I get put off because you're always referring to your book, and I lose my train of thought because you're just going on and on about your book. And then the other thing is extending your answer. And when I talk about this, people say, "Oh, what do you mean by extending your answer? Isn't that you're supposed to give enough knowledge about, the question that you've been asked?" And I say it's when you're trying to involve other aspects of your book or other aspects of the topic just to get in more about your book into the answer. And you can go round and round and round in circles and find yourself in a twist and you're wondering, how did I get here and how can I get out of it so I sound intelligent, I sound, credible, and I sound like I know what I'm talking about. Because you may have built up a good profile of yourself and talks, good talk, but you get to this point where you've just found yourself in a model. And for some people, it's very difficult to get out of because they've done that. And then the other thing is being too laid back. Podcasts, you might think because it's not traditional radio, so therefore you don't have to be professional, but you still have to be because you're an author now. You have that label that says you're an author, and people see you as a professional. It's a profession for a lot of people, and going on and just as if you're talking to someone down at the pub. I mean, we say pub here in the UK, but just going on and talking as if you're talking to people regularly, I think you're not doing the people who've tuned in to listen to you. It's I think it might be, this is my personal opinion, and I think it doesn't show respect for people who've taken the time to listen to the content that you want to share. And it's not fair on the host as well if that's how you want to conduct yourself during an interview. So 3 ways to repurpose your interviews. I've been talking about how great it is to start to go on a podcast interview, prepare, what you should do during the interview. But after the interview, and this is another reason why I think people should, look at podcasts and look at podcast interview. That's a good way to promote their book. It's because you can repurpose your content. And you can repurpose them into sound bites. And I've just recently done an interview, and I'm going to edit it and chop it up into three, 4 parts where I can use those bits to talk about this interview I went on and talk about different aspects of my book. I can create videos. So my interview was about 45 minutes long. I would have bits, maybe 3-minute stings or 4-minute stings, depending on how I've answered the question or how the question have been asked. And then I'll create videos, just little sound bites, and I put them onto YouTube. There's an audience there who would consume that content, and that's fine. And the other thing is you can transcribe your interviews, and I'll just give you some quick examples. But let's look at SoundCloud as well. I'll just give you 3 reasons why I love SoundCloud. And I would say this: if they would have me as their ambassador, I would very willingly be their ambassador, and I don't need any money for it because I just love the platform so much. So here's the first thing I would say is track engagement, and which is very important for you as an author. You can see this is an interview I did with Joanna Penn. We've had 254 listeners, but importantly, you can see that someone else has left a comment for her. Well, this is on my platform, but if it was on her platform, and if it's on your platform, you'd be able to see who has left a comment. This is, as an author, this is what you want. You want to know who is listening, who's making comments. And the brilliant thing about SoundCloud is they can leave a comment at the very point that what you've said is relevant. So if you're talking about an experience you had, and someone can just leave a comment at that point and say, "Oh, I so understand what you're talking about. I went through exactly the same thing." They don't have to wait till the end of the interview. They can do it right there, and that's why I think it's just a brilliant. One of the reasons why I think it's a brilliant tool. And this is easy to embed on a website. So imagine if this is on your website, a fan has listened to your interview, they think their own listeners, they have their own platform, they think their own listeners are going to be interested in what you said in this interview. They can embed it on their own website. And the brilliant thing is, on your website, you still get the counts. You can see more people listening to your interview. Of course, you can turn off that functionality if that doesn't appeal to you. But I think as an author, you're trying to reach as many people as possible. There's some interviews I've done, for my previous podcast, that someone listened to it, found it was valuable, and he's embedded it on his website. So whatever happens, there'll be more people listening to it, and the numbers just keep on going because it's on someone else's website. But I can keep track of it because the source is mine. The other thing is, it's very easy to share your content from SoundCloud. You can see you can link your email address to it, Pinterest, Google+, Tumblr, Twitter, and Facebook. And those are the major social media platforms. And if you can share to them directly from this, then even if it's on your website, then I think that's a great thing. You have more access. And when you look at it, if you've done an interview, a full interview, you've repurposed it on SoundCloud, you can just keep on sharing that at different bits, different times. If you've got clips of it, then all the better. You can just say, "Oh, here's an interview." Just give an intro into it. This is an interview I did with X, and it's 4 minutes. You can drive traffic back to your website as well, and share it multiple times. Doesn't mean because you shared it a week ago or a month ago or 6 months ago that it's still not relevant. You're still building your author brand with it. And I look at it, and this is another reason I like it, because it's such an elegant display. When you've you've got many, maybe you've done 3 or 4 interviews, and why I talk about, planning. You can have 3 or 4 interviews. You can put them all together on a in what SoundCloud calls a playlist, and put them together embed all of them on your website. This increases engagement on your website because when one interview finishes, they can just listen to the next one. They don't have to go and start playing it again on another platform. They can listen to everything there, and so you have people spending longer time on your website. So let's look at video. This is an author I interviewed. I took just a chapter of her book because she was talking about a particular aspect, a particular theme from her book. It was about 5 to 7 minutes. I created a video out of it and I posted it. And this is another thing you can do. When you chop up your interviews, or even if it's the full interview, you can repurpose it and create a video, because there are people who would listen on YouTube or any of the other video platforms out there. And you're creating more, you're improving your SEO, but you're engaging with people out there on a different platform. And then transcribed. This is an interview I did with one of my clients. I transcribed the interview for her, and you can see it just went through the different things that we talked about. And the great thing about transcribing your interview, 2 minutes is approximately 350 words. That's a lot if you're writing a blog. So imagine a 30-minute interview, how many words you have with that, and how you can repurpose it on your website, or you can approach publications or guest blogs to talk about what you covered in the interview. And I think when you've planned the interview, you know what you want to talk about during the interview. Then you can that's a section of the interview that you can use for many different purposes. So what if you're not ready for podcast interviews? Because I know not a lot of people want to go through the whole thing of approaching a host, and you want to, they're going to ask you all these questions. You might be nervous. You've never done it before. You're just not ready to go through all that. I think there's another way, and I know there is another way. You can use a professional. And the advantages are you are in control of the whole process. You decide what questions you're going to be asked. You prepare the question, you decide what exactly you want to say and who exactly you want to say it to. So for instance, if you've written a book, if we just use the example for the productivity book, the book is talking about different aspects of productivity, and we've selected a chapter for the legal sector. You can tailor a particular chapter of your book or particular aspect of your book for whichever niche audience you want to target. And that's a great thing about scheduling it on your own time frame and how you want to sound when you do that. And then you can record at your own pace. You decide how much longer you want to talk for. You're not going over and above. You know the content exactly to the last word that you're going to say. And then you're much more relaxed because you're not under the pressure of being on someone else's, say, oh, hello and welcome to the podcast. And then you're into that zone of, I have to perform, And for some people, they see it that way and they're not comfortable with that. If you're using a professional, you're doing it at your own pace. So you decide if it's about raising awareness or of your book, or it's about your author brand. So I mentioned at the beginning I have a special offer for the AMI group, and it's 20% off one of my services called Meet the Author. And Meet the Author it's a short interview. When I say short, it's 15 to 20 minutes interview that you can add to your media kit. And I think every author should have a media kit, and in your media kit it's going to be full of different things. So you would have word, you would have videos, and you would have audio within it. So I don't advocate that it's only a podcast interview that would be in your media kit. But the thing about a media kit is you have prepared it and you have tailored it for what you want people to know about you. So in this interview, it's going to enhance your appeal and grow your fan base, because you'll be able to include a link in your ebook. You can showcase who you are on your writing journey. And what I said, you can say what exactly you want people to know about you. If this is the first thing they're going to hear about you, you can decide what that's going to be. And you can proactively, approach media outlets and say, oh, here's an interview I did. I would like you to listen to it. I would like to either write a feature on this about what I've done from my book, or I would like to come onto your own show to talk about a particular aspect of your book. And then, like I said, you can repurpose it. So if you go to bit.ly, that's bit.ly/AMI offer, you'll be able to access this. There's a limited time on this offer. Or you can go to audiomarketingexpert.com/AMI to access the offer for you. So thank you very much for listening. If you want to get in touch, I'm Viv. My name is Viv, but you can access me on my email is audiomarketingexpert@gmail.com. Audio Marketing Expert at MKTG out on Twitter, and then on Instagram, I'm audio.expert. So thank you for listening. I hope I've provided some value to you. And please connect with me on any of these platforms. And I just want to say, Jim, thank you very much for having me on. And over to you.